Most good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fifth session. As we've been saying, it seems unbelievable to think we're on session 5. But yeah, really looking forward to doing tonight's session, our virtual training session, to where we try to give you a few practical ideas for you to take away. Just a little bit before we start, just the usuals in terms of housekeeping. Please keep your microphones on mute, and unless we say otherwise, and just use the chat box sparingly. Tonight's session is being supported by Enator. They're another partner of England Athletics. They specialise in shock absorbing insoles, and we'll get some details later on. There's some vouchers available as part of a prize draw for you, and they can explain a bit more about the product. Supporting us tonight, for those of you who missed it, we've got Kerry Newell, who's joining us tonight. Kerry's been a long-term supporter of England Athletics. She's been involved in driving, run, leading in the Gloucestershire area. There's a huge amount around kind of coaching and tutoring, and it'll be great to have her thoughts on things tonight. Chris Allender will again be supporting with the chat box, and will be on hand. So if you've got any additional questions, please fire them into the chat box. And I think at that point we're somewhere near ready to go. I think when Chris and I spoke about trying to do these sessions, we felt there was a real place to try and think about some practical takeaways, so some tips around the session, a little bit around form. So hopefully we can use tonight to bridge that gap. So at that point, I'm going to pass you over to Chris, who'll tell you a little bit more about what tonight's about, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome back to everybody. This is week number 5, and time soon flies, doesn't it? At this moment in time, the screen's frozen, so I'm going to have to just talk through this straight away. Technology. Tonight, thank you, Emma. Tonight, what we've got is this. We're going to look at how to incorporate running technique into your sessions. Give you some example of training sessions through Paul, Kerry, Rich, and myself. And then also throughout the night, we'll integrate this into some resources as we go, somewhere you can go to for further reading almost. That's what you want from it. So what we're going to do now then is, I suppose, is get you start thinking first of all about what is it you would like really to include in your training sessions. The key thing to begin with, of course, is the idea that what we need is a warm-up. It's my favourite bit of the night, because I get a chance to have a chin wag to everybody I'm warming up with, and a chance there for me to de-stress some work and get myself prepared for the session. Also, you've got your main session as well, and that becomes again to the element of what's your focus for the session. Do you just go out there and take for a run, or is there an actual an idea, a focus for this, a goal you want to achieve from it? And then, of course, we have the cool down. And I know we've had the conversation in the last 5 weeks about where people have said they'll just jump in the car and go home. We've had this, Kerry and myself have had this many times on Lurf courses where people have said just that. And our challenge really is, and for yourselves to share good practice, get people, have a cool down, do some stretching, and then go home. And
Chris, Chris Hollinshead, sorry to jump in, mate. I was just going to ask, on the screen, we've just got a few kind of grey blobs, which I think sort of impacting people's viewing experience. Is your presentation on kind of full view? I'm just wondering whether it'd go away if you yeah, that's got rid of one. Just wondering whether you can put it on a different view or anything. I don't know if Emma is there or whether you've got anything your end.
Just checking.
Just give us one moment. We're just trying to get rid of
looks perfect, you see.
We've got a few little blobs appearing.
And anything else on it?
It might be these bits.
Anything now?
Yeah, just got one left at the top, and if you get rid of that, you're laughing, I think.
That's where all the controls are.
The controls at the top.
Can you hide the controls?
I don't know. Can we hide the controls at the top then? That must be the last one then. Try that.
You've got one in the middle of the screen. You got one covering the text there. If you want, I can go back to sharing my screen if you stop sharing, and we'll just bring you in for the videos.
Okay, fine. Yeah, try that.
Right, sorry about this. It wouldn't be a webinar without there being a few IT bits. So let's give it a go. Let's go from here.
Try yours. Oh, the delights of streaming. Try that, Rich.
What does that look like, people? Have you lost the grey blob bits? Let's see what's coming up in the chat box. Is it any better?
Someone says perfect.
Okay.
Cool.
That's a lot better, thank you.
Right, let's give it a go from here. Sorry about
The
that.
controls have been put at the top.
Okay. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Over to you, Chris. Sorry.
Right. If you want to put the next slide up for me, please, then.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the idea of the session then. We'd like your session then to include a warm-up, a main session, a cool down. And ultimately, we want you to think about, I suppose, within your training session, what is the focus of the night? That's probably the starting point for this. So if we go forward one.
Yeah.
Is what is the focus of the night? So for example, you may say, actually, the idea is I just want people to work a bit on flexibility. It could be running technique. It could be the fact we want people to develop some endurance. It's about just having a goal, a focus for the night is the first key theme to take away, and build that into your training session. So what we're going to do now tonight is this. We are going to look at, first of all, at giving you some ideas for a warm-up. That's our first focus tonight. And the scene is set in that, think of it, many of your runners are coming from work, they're coming, some are traveling a distance. And so the example will be, what about the runner who's been working all day, they've driven 120 miles to get back in a rush back to your venue for their session. And think of them in terms of being very, very stiff after all that driving. So upon arriving at the club is the next port of call.
Okay, so just a couple of things before we start. You are going to play some videos. You might find that some of them aren't in the greatest definition when you watch them, but you will get a copy of these, so please don't worry about it. Chris will just talk through what's happening in all the videos. Chris, over to you, mate.
Okay, thank you. Right. The first thing to bear in mind is these were filmed 3 weeks ago when it was -11 outside, if you remember that. So what we did is we got Emma to help us out with this. So the idea is what the runner does is they get to the venue, and of course they're feeling pretty stiff, and you get that stiffness in your lower back, don't you, when you come out of a car. So what we're saying here is there's an opportunity straight away before you even do anything else to actually start mobilizing the body. So in this case, Emma's getting out the car. Let's think about running technique straight away. Let's think about mobilizing, stay tall as though attached to the helium balloon itself, and start to mobilize. Now you will naturally start to mobilize the element, the parts of your body which feel tight after driving or sitting down all day. So in this case there, it's Emma's shoulders straight away. And then she'll start to walk around at the same time. And you know what it's like when you get to a service station sometimes, you're going on your holiday, you get out the car, and of course, you know, you just want to stretch and walk, and that's all Emma's doing there. So to recap, perfect opportunity here to mobilize straight away, get the movement going around the joints.
Okay, let's move on to our next one then. So this is integrating technique into a warm-up.
Okay, so picture the scene. What you're going to do for your warm-up then now is you've done some mobilization. We thought about staying tall straight away as our first port of call. Now we're thinking about, you've probably gone off and had a pulse raiser. Could be a walk, could be a fast walk, could be a jog, something again. And now, of course, we're going into a little bit more dynamics. So you might still have 5 or 10 minutes spare before the group are ready to depart for the run. Here's an opportunity now to really start working some of the muscles. So what we got there first of all then, okay, 2 activities taking place. If you watch it, you got Emma there working on a forefoot, which is certainly stretching the plantar under the balls of your feet, okay. And then also there, it looks like she's still doing a heel to toe walk at the same time, walking from heel to toe to get the full range of movement. Also then what you'll see now is Emma actually mobilizing the soleus calf muscle. Now it might look a bit like 1980, this madness, baggy trousers video from all those years ago, but actually it's not. Once the knee's bent, you start engaging the soleus calf muscle. So in that respect, suddenly there, what you can see is knees are bent. The pressure now is on the lower bit of the calf, and you'll feel it around the Achilles tendon and the lower bit of the calf. that bit of the muscle there, which almost resembles spaghetti junction, where your toe flexors come in, your Achilles and your soleus calf. So you're mobilizing that. The other, so to recap so far, we've got knee bent, we've got walking on heels, we have got walking on your forefoot, and then walking from heel to toe. So this is all to do with foot contact. So at that time now, your foot is naturally starting to roll through the movement it's going to need. And at the same time there, Emma is still using that helium balloon. She is still staying tall, lengthening. So remember, if you've been sitting down all day, there's nothing nicer than lengthening.
Okay, we will move on to our next slide. We have just had somebody has suggested in the chat box that you might have an improved video quality if everyone turns off their bandwidth. I'm not going to lie, I don't actually know how to do that. So if you know how to do it, please pop it up in the chat box and we can provide instructions for people. All right, we're just going to move us on to the next slide. All right.
I think everyone just needs to turn their videos off and then
okay,
while the videos are playing, and see if that makes any difference. Then put the videos back on later on.
Perfect. Okay, if people are happy to do that, that would be great. And we'll go into our next one, and we'll let Chris explain what the purpose is of this one. All right.
Okay, so we're still working at the moment on foot contact. This one then is is for the feet again. These are just taps on the floor. So what we're doing there, of course, is we're going to do about 10 taps on each foot here, on the left foot, on the right foot, on the forefoot onto the floor itself. And again, what you're doing there is you're working your foot through the full movement pattern, okay, of the flexion and plantar down all the time. And again, it's getting the foot ready there for the fact it's going to start hitting the ground quickly in about 10 or 15 minutes time.
Perfect. Chris, you ready for me to move on?
Yep. You'll get copies of all these videos. Taking it one stage forward now. So what Emma's now going to start doing is she's actually walking these through. You can run them through if you want, but these are going to be walked through. This one is hamstring recovery. You can see there on the left-hand video, the knees coming up approximately about 45 degrees. And look how it's folding right under the backside itself, the element, okay? It's folding there under the buttock. And again, you can just walk forward doing that. You can do it on the spot. But again, it's preparing the body for what activity is to come. And at the same time, why not use your arms? So the arms are driving back as they would do when running. You can either run this through, you can walk it through. And then the other one, again, what you're going to start doing is going to a high knee motion where the knee is slightly more exaggerated and the knee comes up higher. So we're working down a range of movement. So what we've done so far is we've worked there on the foot contact. We're now doing slightly greater range of movement, and the movements have also now going to start speeding up at the same time to prepare us for activity.
Perfect. Okay, we'll move on to our next one.
Okay, taking it 2 stages forward. You can do this with resistance bands. You can do it just standing there. This is your ABCs, agility, balance, coordination. And what we're doing there, of course, is we've got Emma now doing about 10 leg swings forward and backwards. She's actually, the support leg there is taking the strain. That's what it's got to do all 226 miles of your marathon. And if your balance isn't quite, you need it for your balance, if you need to get some support, just hang on to the side and let your legs swing forward and backwards. It feels gorgeous because there's no weight involved. And the other one, the other side there is adducting, okay, taking the leg away, bringing it back, but it's all balance. Oh, and guess what? It's also creating strength at the same time, because you're balancing and you've got to coordinate your body. So your glutes now, your movement around your joints for your hip is beginning to work.
Okay, let's take you on to the next one.
And then what we've got on the left-hand side now is one of my favorite ones. No one's ever told me this exercise feels bad at all. And this is the one where you're doing your adductors. You've just mobilized it by standing there. Now it's more dynamic even more as you rock from side to side. And you think about it running wise, you know, the adductors on the inside take a great deal of strain because they're stabilizing muscles. It feels good. My suggestion to runners is that sometimes what you want to do is You just want to be able to extend your warm-up. Say you've had a race, for example, you want to extend your warm-up. So if you spend longer on one particular activity, it doesn't matter. It's because the body wants it. Your other one there, of course, Emma's just doing some forward lunges. The key about lunges is for the back to be in a neutral position and for the front foot there to get that beautiful whole foot landing. You can alter your pattern for lunges if you want to. But again, these are just activities, a sample range that you can integrate into it. And do remember when we did this, it was -11. You know, so in essence, we had to just prepare Emma more for the activity.
Okay, right, let's go on to our next one.
Okay, what we've got now then is some scissor kicks for the hip flexors now on the left-hand side. So what Emma actually going to do is she start kicking forward, just really to point to my attention. She's not trying to do any kind of specific hard movement pattern where she's going to pull a muscle. It's just literally kicking forward and letting your foot land under your center of gravity. Isn't that what you do when you're running? So the forefoot lands under the center of gravity, legs stay straight, and you just scissor kicking forward. You can do it on your spot. As I say, you haven't got to get your legs as high as possible. It's just about getting the movement pattern going. And then the other one you're seeing Emma doing there, of course, is what you've seen on the warm-up one, is that now she's actually doing arm swings. So again, you know, you can do it for about 15, 20 seconds or count to 30 if you just want to count in your arms. And what you're going to do is stand there and just drive your arms back. Arms drive back, and as you drive back, of course, that's where the momentum comes from. And then what she's doing is she's doing a split squat and changing legs. Now, as I look at the video, it's freezing at the moment, but actually Emma will change legs, reset the position as you will when you're running, and then drive the arms again. So don't neglect the arms. The arms are going to take you a long way in a training session, so you can warm them up. And all these activities you can do even before you probably have time to, before you even go out with the running group. 5 or 10 minutes, just do some activity. You can do them with other people if you wanted to.
Okay, and let's move on again. So take us towards the latter end of our warm-up.
Okay, so when you've got to that stage now and you feel you've done enough to dynamic activities there, what you can then do, of course, is do some running. Now, in this case, Emma's doing 5 times 60 meter, nice relaxed run outs. Look, this is our natural working environment. There's potholes, as you can see, there's tarmac, and we were tempted to put the video in where the sheep came down the road and stopped everybody, but we kept that one out deliberately. And so 5 times 60 meters, but the technique's still going in, because what Emma's doing now is staying tall, driving her arms, and as I said, being attached to the helium balloon. If you wanted to progress that more, you can then do 5 times 60 meters as an acceleration run. Each run gets slightly faster. You can walk or jog back down again, but you're never going to go to full speed. What you got to do eventually is just get the body ready for the activity it's going to undertake and the speed involved. So the chances are you're not going to go sprinting off. So you don't take the body that high, but you're just trying to get the body ready for the activity to be undertaken. So from what you've seen so far, you start slow, okay? Emma getting out the car, using that opportunity to mobilize. Then she works on flexibility of the muscles as well. And over the 5 or 10 minutes, so the tempo starts to increase. But throughout the whole of that, as a coach, what I've done is I have integrated running technique so that it becomes ingrained into the athlete, the runner, week in, week out, without thinking about it. So to recap the running technique bit, stay tall as they attach to a helium balloon, stay tall at the hips. Think about your arms, get them driving back from the moment you actually start the main session. And that's just 3 tips I'm putting in from this. Other leaders may say something else. Up to you what you want to put in, but you've got to get the runners warmed up. Rich.
Perfect. Right, I'll bring this one to a stop and I will move us on. I suppose it is just before we go on to the next section. Does anybody have any questions in the chat box about what they've seen? And also, it doesn't just have to be aimed towards Chris and myself. Kerry's got a fountain of knowledge as well. She might be able to bring in as well. All right. Let's just give people a moment. If anything's coming in on the chat box, ask it away now. Again, sorry if you've had limited viewing experience, but we will send all of these out with you.
Alexandra, yeah, completely agree. Hip rotations, it's superb, isn't it? Swinging forward and backwards, side to side, diagonally. It feels wonderful, doesn't it? It's just so much of release because there's no gravity there. And of course, it's great again for getting that mobility. And the key thing is that for many runners, of course, is that we've been busy all day long. So we get to running at the end of the day and we're feeling stiff. So try to release where you feel stiff. We meet on a pub car park. Is it okay to do a bit of a jog? Yeah, absolutely. Remember the pulse raiser. So what Emma did there, she got out of the car, she just walking across to meet everybody. Then do your pulse raiser, your jog, your walk, anything you want for 5 or 6 minutes, please do, yeah. And all you're trying to do then, of course, is trying to dynamically get the body active, ready for the session.
Kerry, just to bring you in a second, if you've got any particular sort of thoughts or anything you'd add in terms of to what people have seen so far?
Yeah, I just put something on that. Someone's mentioned the Night Training Club app, which is excellent for warm-ups. They've got one session on there that I use sometimes for my younger athletes called Drill Essentials, which is a good one to use. And there's a host of S&C stuff on there for runners, which I was poo-pooed about first of all until my 14-year-old girl showed me it, and I was like, actually, there's some really useful stuff on there that we would use for running. So there's some great stuff there for things, and it's free, which is quite good as well. Yeah. So no, I think there's some really useful information there that got. Obviously, with your warm-ups, you make them to adapt the warm-up to the level of intensity of the main session that's coming up. So if you're doing sprints or hill sprints or anything like that, like hill running and it's sprinting, then obviously make sure your warm-up is to the level, finishes at the level of intensity that your main session is going to start.
Perfect. And I suppose just one other thing that's always just worth thinking about when we are talking about warm-ups is it's just always about adapting the levels of the drills based on the ability of the group. You know, to perhaps start with the more simplistic stuff and gradually progress it to make sure people have mastered some of the basics. Chris showed the video of sort of a lunge there. You can always see some weird and wonderful things which happen with different people lunging. So before people start trying to do sort of backwards lunges and sideways lunges, it's always good to do something in a static position.
Yeah, I think if you've got them doing lunges and you demonstrate a really low lunge, especially with beginners, they're going to try and do that too. So always adapt your demonstration to the level of the runner you've got in front of you. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, so a couple of take homes there about kind of potentially the use of the Night Training app. Terry alluded to sort of obviously making sure that it's linked to the session as well. And we've even had here from Suzanne saying, consider the weak pelvic floor. Yeah, it's a really, really good point. I coach a couple of female athletes who, after giving birth and so forth, have obviously found that's been quite a difference to their training as well. So it is also just worth thinking about how you can adapt the sessions accordingly to the group. Okay, I'm going to pass back over to Colin's head. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through 4 sample sessions, which link to some of the training cards you'll have seen on the Lead and Running Fitness course, and give some ideas of a bit that you can do. Chris, do you want me to start playing the videos?
Yes, please.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Welcome back again. So you've had some wonderful input there from the other coaches again, and this is brilliant. And I've seen wonderful messages again coming through about sharing ideas. What we're going to look at now then is this idea that on the LERF course and the Curve course, there was session cards available to you. So we now have 4 session cards. I have chosen hill running. And my take on the hills is this, is that actually a lot of the running clubs say to me, well, we only have probably 2 or 3 sessions a week. We might meet once a week. The runners have 2 or 3 sessions. So if I was going to do hills, what's the best way of doing them? So my take is this. I would do hill running where I can go up a hill and go down the other side. That's my perspective on it. Now, everybody's completely different on this. So what we've got here is Emma actually running. If anybody recognizes the location, please put in the chat box where it is. And Emma's coming up a hill. Now, the key thing about hill running is this, is that, again, we said to you, it's that technicality bit. Stay tall with high hips. We've done that in the warm-up element. The arms drive backwards. Now, the arms may be driving back in a more vigorous action this moment in time, because the arms go in time with the legs, so she's got to drive back. You may find, depending now on the actual hill itself, that, you know, shorter stride length is required, but the body will push off the forefoot. So all the activities we've done earlier in that warm-up there are designed to get the foot to move all the way through. So my hill session tonight is this. What we've got is a 1.5 mile circuit, okay? So I'm not going to, so mine isn't about going up a hill 10 times, once every 10 weeks, because the body forgets about it. So why doesn't it do it more often than that? So this is a 1.5 mile circuit. And if anybody knows it, it's actually at Ranworth on the Norfolk Broads. And believe it or not, it's not as flat as you think. There's actually one flat section. There's an uphill by the church and a downhill. Beautiful for a training session. So in this case, what Emma's going to do is she's going to work hard going up the hill. And as she gets to the brow of the hill, suddenly then what she's got to do is recover very quickly in a space of about 15 seconds and kick straight off the other side. Now, the body then has got to readapt itself for its technique. Depending upon the gradient, you may find the arms just drive back. Slightly higher gradient, the arms may start to flail to the side and balance the body instead. But ultimately, the foot contact still becomes going down the hill mid-foot stance. You think about if I stand back on myself, what happens to the body? It almost becomes that banana skin effect. So get the body again to lean forward a little bit, going down to get the counterbalance right. And so what Emma's doing there, we're going to say this, it's like a 1.5 mile section. She's actually going to do 3 of these, put about 5 or 6 minutes in between each rep. And what you've got there is the runner getting used to running up hills at speed, getting used to recovering on the top of the hill in a very short amount of time before they kick off down the other side and go quicker and then back to a flat. Because the argument's this: it's no good being able to run up a hill quick if you can't accelerate down the other side, because the person on the other side will wave to you as they go past you, and vice versa. So you've got to get the body used to it. So, you know, that is my session tonight, really. It's about using an uphill and a downhill, because I've only got a chance to do this once a week when I see the runners as a group. So it's more time effective for me to get the runners used to it, because ultimately, as I always say, think in terms of that big race you've got planned. Is there any gradients in it? Yes or no? If there's a hill, how long is it for? What's the gradient of it? How long is it the other side? What's the length of it? What's the gradient going down? And prepare for that.
Chris, I'm gonna give you a little challenge now. You know you like it when I give you one of these on the spot. So I think it's Deborah's just popped something on the chat box, which I love because it's brilliantly honest. And it's when hill reps are on the schedule for my group, I find it's the least attended. No idea why, but I've explained the benefits, but it's difficult to persuade them. I guess just on that point, obviously it's that balance between giving things that will help people improve, but also making it fun. What would be your sort of sell, or what would be your kind of reward for people doing hill reps? Have you got any particular kind of little nuggets which might encourage more people to do them?
Yeah, I tell them they're going to do it. No, seriously. No, the point is this, right? You raise a good point. I generically, I don't take runners out for hill reps, because the point is this: I need X amount of, I need to repeat things for X amount of weeks to get the return back. Doing it as a one-off, what's he going to do really? He's really going to benefit. So it's how you're right, Rich. It's about how you sell it, how you put the package together. So I will build something like this. It could just be an out and back run, which I think Paul's going to do tonight for me. You know, so I use a circuit as well over in Norbury in Staffordshire, which is a 2 mile out, 2 mile back. There's 3 hills going out and 3 coming back. They get used to doing that week in, week out. So they build up the strength, they build up the running technique, they build up the acceleration of it. What you can do actually, if you wanted to do hill reps specifically and get people there is actually you could have challenges, couldn't you? You could do like, you know, the king or queen of the mountains perspective from the Tour de France. You could look at who wants to get there to the top quickest, for example. It could be the fact of, as opposed to looking about going up a hill, why don't you get them going down the hill fast instead? Running quicker down the hill, because actually that's a skill we need to master. What I would say is generically hills over 9%, your running technique starts to alter. So unless they're going to do any hills where they're going to suddenly running technique will alter, keep hills at a slightly lower gradient. And that way, then it becomes more applicable, probably, depending on what we're doing, as to what they're actually going to do in reality. But yeah, you know, you could have challenges. You could have everybody in the group going a different distance up a hill. So I went and did a club run down at Ashbourne a couple of years back, and one dark winter's night, we had about 30 runners, and everybody was doing a different distance. And what I did is I let them decide where they wanted to go. But the only thing I told them was, you've all got to do 6 hills. You decide where you want to go, because everybody's at a different level, and some are developing for different events. So the choice is yours.
So one thing we've taken from Chris and in the chat box, if in doubt, just lie to your runners that they're not going to do hills and just gradually incorporate them into your routes. But yeah, and on a serious point, it's about trying to embed it into sessions and you know, sort of make it fun as well. Okay, let's move on. Let's bring in Paul, and he will do our next one for us. Let's bring Paul in now. Paul, are you there, mate? Paul, have we got you? If Paul is not here, I will let Chris Hollinshead go through this one for us as well. Chris, do you want to go through?
Yeah, I was going to say, we'd like to move to Kerry's first, and I'll just check if Paul's online.
Yeah, that's fine. Kerry, are you happy to go through your session for us? I'll just bring your slide up a second, all right?
Yes.
Okay, over to Kerry, and she will go through meet and retreat with you, all right?
Okay, can they see me on the screen? Just in case I'm picking my nose or something.
Well, you know, that's the risk, Kerry. No, they should be able to see you now, yeah.
Right, okay. So meet and retreat is a session that I've used lots in the past. It's a really good session that you can use for mixed abilities. So if you've got some beginners in your group and you've also got a lot of experienced runners, it's really good for that. So what I would start with saying is that you need to think about meet and retreat as whether you're going to be doing it as an endurance-based session or a speedier interval-based session, okay? And obviously for both experienced and beginners, the sound is quality. What's the buzzing noise? Okay, hang on a minute. Right, I might need to go and get my headphones then. Is it buzzing for everybody, Rich?
Yeah, I tell you what we'll do. Let's give Kerry a couple minutes to get her headphones sorted out. If
Shall I take over Paul's if he's not there?
Yeah, do you want to do that, Chris? And then
Paul Evans, are you in the house tonight?
Yeah, perfect.
Technical problems. Okay, right. I'll take over Paul's then if he's not there. Okay, so we've obviously got technical glitches tonight. If you go back one slide, please, for Paul's. Okay, so one next, right. Paul Evans then in Norfolk actually uses out and back, okay, which is interesting. And it's one of my favorite sessions too. What he does is he takes them down to Earlham Park in Norwich and he operates like a 20-minute out and back. So they go 10 minutes one way and then 10 minutes back. Now, they're not allowed timing devices, Garmin's or anything else. It's out of the question. This is a session about pace judgment. And the best way to learn it is actually by taking away your devices. So what he does is he stands there with his whistle and they go on a loop. And the aim, of course, is to get back. He wants them back in a similar amount of time. So they get to learn pace judgment week in, week out. So it's for all ability levels. And regardless of what ability they are, everybody goes out 10 minutes. And when he blows his whistle, they all come back for 10 minutes. And people then will also start to judge where they are in relation to everybody else. They'll start to learn pace judgment at the same time. It's very easy, he says, for himself to manage this. He can actually, because it's a confined area, he can see everybody, but it also gives him an opportunity to provide feedback. And we mentioned that last week. And as I say there, it's also good, he says, for developing the camaraderie between the runners, regardless of ability levels. They turn up, they run, and they enjoy the session, but also they can talk about some of the issues being raised at the same time. And it's also, of course, as he says there, you know, there's a central place to leave your kit, leave your keys, and even like the hill session previously, which I mentioned, and this one here, these can all be done very easily socially distant, because the area is sufficiently large enough for the amount of runners taking place to be able to do that. So you're covering the safety elements of it, and that's Paul's take on an out and back.
Chris, can I just jump in a second? We've just had a question which has been asked. We've obviously talked about some of the points around technique. One of the things we've referred to is kind of high hips. And are you able just to kind of explain what you mean by a runner running with high hips and what you'd kind of be looking for?
Okay, so what we're looking for there is, and I'll let Kerry come in this one as well. What we're looking for there is a runner. Pretend you attach that helium balloon, and what it's doing is I'm going to stand up. It's lifting you straight up in the air, okay? So your upper torso now is extended, and your hips actually in that respect are high. So your legs are straight and your hips are high. Because now I'm staying tall, what it means is it gives me greater opportunity when my leg recoils back, as it does during the running phase, for me to land more under the center of gravity, with the midfoot landing under my hips themselves, by actually staying tall. If you watch runners at the end, for example, of a marathon, ask yourself, are them runners staying tall with high hips? Or is it the fact now the legs look a little bit buckled and the body now is leaning forward a bit? And as such, then suddenly think about your optimal position. Kerry, how would you like to add?
Yeah, I would agree definitely with what Chris is saying. Everything he said there about landing your foot landing underneath your centre of mass, and it will only do that if your hips are nice and high with that tall balloon above your head. But it also means then that your glutes can be working properly as well, which are our big power muscles on our bodies, aren't they, really, Chris? So we need those to be sort of firing correctly. And if you're sort of like leaning forward slightly, you're not using your glutes properly, you're using probably your quads instead. So having that nice and tall, and as you see these runners at the end of a marathon that are leaning over, it's because their trunk stability in their core is not strong enough to cope with the demands of what they're going through. So having that strong core around the middle is going to help with that high hips that you have as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kerry. Now, there's a question there from,
awful noises.
What was it, Michelle or Angela, who asked, how does an 800 meters work for out and back? Right. The beautiful thing about this is, I use bigger distance sometimes to ease the boredom. So if I was going out for a 12-mile run, I know in January people laughed when I said I did 12 miles on a 400 piece of tarmac road 48 times, because that was the only bit that was ice-free. I did do that genuinely. But actually, a lot of the time we go further distance. You don't necessarily need to take them on big runs to get the same effect. So what Paul's doing, he's got them on the grass. Beautiful surface, it's soft underfoot, so there's less strain going through the body. 800 meters is half a mile, so they'll just keep going round and round. I suppose like a race course effect or an athletics track. They'll keep going round and round for 10 minutes. But there's no one going in opposite directions, because when the whistle goes, he blows it, they then go back on themselves. And you can overtake someone, of course you can, just keep 2 meters clear. Does that kind of help? So it's a great question, that one. Hopefully we've answered that one. But yeah, don't think you've got to have big distances. And sometimes think about the surface you're running on, because, you know, to do repetitions on the road, there's a lot of strain going through your legs on the tarmac. So think about, well, can I do a different surface? Have you got some off-road? Have you got some grass? Some people have got beaches as well. So there's so many different surfaces you can use, which will give you a different effect.
Just to add one thing in there, Chris, just when we were talking about out and back, and it's probably an example which could be used with a smaller loop. You potentially could sort of actually sometimes be thinking of one of the benefits of doing an out and back type run might be to achieve a negative split, where you're running the second half of the run faster than the other. So, for example, you know, if you were running around an 800 meter loop, you might run, I don't know, 3 or 4 kilometers going round the loop for a period of time. And then actually your challenge could be just to continue running the same distance, but pick that pace up a little bit. So yes, the traditional out and back is you go out to a point and come back, but it is also an opportunity to think of it, if you're using a smaller loop, as perhaps a negative split with a focus on running the second part of the session perhaps a little bit quicker maybe.
Right, I just want to pick up a point from Lauren, please. And I think Kathy says, what do you mean by going out and back? Right, no, an out and back is you actually run out one way and you come back the same way. So you're actually changing directions. So if it's really windy out, for example, there's two ways of doing this. I was preparing the runners a few years back for one of the, I think it's one of the races in Rill. Notoriously in February, it's always a strong wind on the way back. So what I did is on my out and back training runs, I would design the course so they were going out with the wind and turned around and came back against the wind. You may say unfair, but actually they're all thankful of getting used to it, because in the race itself, they had to run against the wind coming back. The prevailing wind goes that direction. So you can use the courses, the natural environment, to the advantage. That also gives you differentiation of the session itself. And that's what gives it the excitement. There's a question from Joanna, is that when we turn my slow runners out the front? Absolutely right, Joanna, that's a great point. So when you turn, somebody else has got the lead, and suddenly it puts a different psychological perspective on the session, because someone else now is in the front. And so if they never had a chance to lead before, how do they react suddenly when they're in the front? So it does different things. There's many different takes on a session. That's a really good point you raised there. Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll move on to the next session now. So we're going to bring Kerry back in, okay, and we'll move on to our next one. So I'm going to pass over to Kerry now. Let's go on to our next slide.
Richard, I've let us play with the. Richard, how does that sound now? Does that sound a bit better?
No, there's still quite a lot of feedback.
Oh dear.
Don't worry too much. Give us a brief overview, and then perhaps if people have got questions in the chat box, we can try and jump in. All right. Okay, cool. Right. Okay. So a meet and retreat session is good for, I said, mixed ability sessions. It's people. It's also very good for intervals, for experienced runners as well. So what we're trying to think about really when you start this session is that whether you want it to be an endurance-based session or whether you want it to be a speed sort of interval type session. Okay. The next thing you need to think about is safety on your route. So I normally use a really big field or like a couple of rugby pitches, for example, and they need to be obviously well lit. You need to think that there's no bins on there, or it's not too dark, or there's dogs, that sort of stuff, okay? Not too slippy. So what will happen is you'll have either, you can have either a big circle, or you can have a rectangle or a long oval shape if you want to. And you have this set up with either you can have trees to use as a natural resource around the area to use, or you can put a couple of cones out or something. Okay, then what you need to think is you sort of set the scene really. So your runners are there, they've done their warm-up already, and you ask them to sort of pair up with somebody who is similar ability to themselves. Rather than you choosing their partner for them, they'll feel much more comfortable if they can just choose their own partners, and they'll know who's similar ability to them, trust me. So then once they've done that, you ask them that if they know the meet and retreat session. If they don't, then I would suggest that you get two people that do know the session to do a quick demo of what you're going to be doing. So essentially what you're going to be doing, if it's an interval session, is you're going to get them to start back to back, and they're going to run out around the circle. And wherever they meet, depending on their ability, one might be quicker than the other. They might meet there or they might meet there. Depends. They won't actually normally meet right in the center. When they do, before COVID, we could high five each other, which obviously now is like a virtual high five at the moment. And then what you're going to get them to do is turn around, but inside the cones area, and turn around and run back on the inside of the cones back to each other to the start, where then they can either stop and have a rest, or whether they're going to be going back out again and meeting again round and round. Okay, so what happens is that obviously if you're doing as an interval session, they can sprint out, then they touch each other, and then they can jog back as a recovery. If you get them to turn around on the spot, they generally tend to smash into somebody else that's coming up that way. So try not to, make sure they come round on the inside before that they are actually sort of, so that they're not crashing into other people. So if you've got beginners there, then I tend to, if you can have 4 beginners together, you can have 2 running out and back, and then you can have 2 resting while the other 2 are running.
If you've got a large group, say 40 or 50 runners, then you can put them onto maybe 2 or 3 areas, and then they can all be split up into sort of, if they want to go the speedy session, they want to do a jog session, or they want to do something in between, and they can choose with their partners or choose by themselves to go there, and then they can meet with somebody else that's doing that sort of thing. So it would be either maybe 5 lots of 3 minutes you can do out and back for 3 minutes, or 3 lots of 5 minutes, even with a 1 rest recovery, or you can have them sprinting out and jogging back down the middle again if they wanted to. So there's huge different things, but you can also do it with a quick runner and a slow runner together, and they meet at different points, and rather than sort of nearer the middle. But it doesn't matter, it just means that the one who's a bit quicker has to run a bit further, which is always a Brucey bonus, isn't it, really? So I think there's a couple of questions from people on that, I think.
We've seen a few different names for this as well, Carrie. We've had Hoedown come up for this session as well. So people are all about the branding. We've had a few examples of people saying runners love it around a sort of a 500 meter loop. People saying it works really well. And generally people seem to quite like this as a session, so it seems quite a popular one.
Yeah, so think about whether you wanted to have it as an interval session or an endurance session first of all. And obviously in endurance you're going to do out and back, and you can make that massive field, like 4 rugby pitches wide, and do it like that, out and back as a 5 minutes of running non-stop, and obviously if you've got your people that you want to do intervals with them, then you can change it up that way. So you can start with a bit of an endurance one, and then you can stop it, pause, have a rest, and then think, actually, do you know what? We'll do some intervals now. So we're going to sprint out and jog back round, or we can do it as 1 minute intervals. So, or if you've got a similar ability, you can jog out when they high five each other, then they've got to get back before their partner does. So it's a bit of a competition element as well. So yeah, just think about them not smashing into each other. That's the main thing that I found is, and when they do get quite competitive on the way back, make sure that they're not smashing into each other on the way back as well, because I've seen that happen too.
So Kerry's top tip is avoid people running into one another at full speed. I think we'll all jump on board with that one. But no, if you have any further questions about it, please jump them into the chat box. But thanks for that, Kerry. That's brilliant. Okay, I'm going to take you through our next one. So I'm just going to bring up our next slide. Let's bring it up. Okay, so we are going to look at a type of training called fartlek, which is an umbrella term for speed play. This actually originates from Sweden, and you'll find, particularly if you're doing this session with younger athletes, when you explain it to them, they'll like to laugh about the name for a couple of minutes. So we need to get past that to begin with. An example of a sort of a fartlek type session, after you've done a decent warm up, you could have a loop, so a 400 meter loop, or what Kerry was alluding to a moment ago, kind of around some rugby pitches. And you might say for 15 minutes, we're going to keep moving, but we're going to change the paces up. And we can include some gentle jogging, some faster running, some walking, some sprinting, etc. The big difference between a fartlek session and an interval session is the fact that fartlek sessions tend to be less structured. So with an interval session, you tend to have a clearly defined amount of time you're going to work for and amount of time you're going to rest for. The thing which makes fartlek training quite different is you're normally just working to a cue. So it might be somebody blowing a whistle or somebody shouting out a change of pace, and the participant doesn't tend to know what's coming next. Why I think fartlek training is absolutely brilliant is, first and foremost, I think it's fun. I think when we look at lots of the different sessions we do, we often find that fartlek's quite good fun because it gets you working at different paces and you never quite know what's coming next, which takes it to one of its other perks, is it's quite varied. One of the things we know really helps with runners' motivations is varying sessions up, doing things different, which excites them. It's suitable for a wide range of ages, so you can potentially do a fartlek session with sort of younger athletes and older athletes if you were doing it, say, based on time. Need to be a little bit careful of sort of their age of development, but again, it's an opportunity which could be an inclusive type session. We've put down here about it stresses the body, so you get used to running faster than you typically would. Something that I notice a lot with myself as a runner and athletes I've coached over the years is when we start races, we tend to have this little dream that we can run absolutely flat out the whole way. What fartlek training is quite good for doing is it does get you used to working at a speed faster than perhaps your race pace, and this begins to help condition you. And particularly at the start of the sessions, it can help us get used to something we consider as oxygen debt, which is basically we've gone too fast and our bodies can't cope with it. Another real benefit of this is it really suits people from other sports. If you look at people who perhaps are games players, for example, but might come along for running for a bit of conditioning work, they'll often find it's really beneficial because by the nature of playing things like football or basketball or hockey or rugby or what have you, you will do some changes of pace, some sort of sprints and that kind of stuff. So it works really well. We've put down another thing here, which I think is really important. We live in an era where we are absolutely owned by our running watches. Everything is about Strava, everything is about Garmin. Actually, one of the great things about this is because you are listening to a cue, you don't have necessarily a predetermined pace. You learn to run on feel, and that's how hard I can work or how easy I can. And sometimes it is good to get away from that. I think sometimes as runners, we put a huge amount of stress on ourselves that I should be running at 8-minute miling or 9-minute miling or whatever it is. Some of these short, sharp bursts, actually your watch doesn't help you that much because by the time you started the rep and finished the rep, your watch hasn't actually caught up with you. So that's something which is worth bearing in mind. One final thing I would say, and thinking about this current world we're working in, I've set quite a few virtual sort of fartlek sessions for athletes, and I've had to adapt it a little bit. In a true traditional sense, fartlek is completely random, so you do something different at each lamp post or different as you go around a loop. What I found works quite well is I might say to an athlete, right, I want you to spend 10 minutes warming up, and then I want you to spend 15 to 20 minutes with some fartlek type work and 10 minutes cooling down. And what I'll often say is within that 15 to 20 minutes, I want you to do 4 really short, sharp sprints, which might be up to 20 seconds, 4 sort of medium sprints, sorry, 4 medium runs, which might be sort of 45 seconds to a minute, and perhaps a couple of longer ones, which are a couple of minutes. It goes away slightly because they know what the content is, but they get to control the recovery and they also get to control the order they put it in. So it's kind of like a bit of a meeting halfway. It's being pragmatic so they know what they've got to do, but it also gives them a little bit of ownership. And that can work quite effectively. I'm just going to bring this box up and see what kind of questions we've had come through. Give me one moment.
Rich, there's a question relating from Neil. Asks, yep. How does it actually work for mixed abilities? And what have you got to do then to the environment to make it work for mixed abilities?
Yes, so for me, the best thing about making it work for mixed abilities is just have a predetermined loop that you're running around. So I'd probably say this would be a session which works brilliantly around a football pitch or a 400-meter loop. And I'd probably say this is one of the sessions where the leader probably is most effective when they're actually in the middle of that area, because they can use a whistle, and 2 whistles might mean walk or 3 whistles might mean sprint. But ultimately, everyone can work at their own pace, particularly if you do it on time. If you're making the sessions based on time, then ultimately everyone can work for the same duration, whether you're the start of your running journey or whether you're perhaps a little bit more competitive.
Rich, an interesting point here from Catherine Robson. What she's saying is that she doesn't have a running watch. She has what I have, which is an old-fashioned digital watch, probably to run with. Okay, so from your perspective now, then, how can that work for the athlete? Just having an old-fashioned digital watch for this session?
You know what? I'd actually say I wish more athletes did just have an old-fashioned digital watch and just use that. I mean, look, there are some sessions where, moving slightly away from fartlek for a moment, say you were doing something like a 400-meter rep, and you were doing multiple reps of them, you could absolutely look at your watch. You could look at your watch on each lap and see, am I running at a consistent pace or what have you? But actually, for a session like this, it's more about learning to listen to your body and operating on feel. So it's, we've probably spoken about the talk test beforehand, but this is a really nice, simple measure. So if I'm going for a nice, comfortable jog with Chris, me and him can chat away a little bit. We're probably working kind of on a relatively low intensity. We might be sort of 4, 5, 6 out of 10. If me and Chris are sprinting against each other, going as fast as we can, we're probably getting towards that 9 or 10, and we're probably not going to have a particularly long conversation because of the stress we're using. So I think 2 key things here, one of which is listen to your body. And secondly, actually, you don't always need a fancy watch. You don't always need that fancy information. It's great for analysing afterwards, and there's always a place for it. But actually, sometimes going back to basics is really healthy as well.
bring in Kerry at this point. Kerry, I mean, we kind of talk this a lot when we're doing the LERV courses and the coach education courses. And the key thing, what's your perspective on this? Why would people benefit sometimes from taking off the watch and running as they feel? What are the benefits from your perspective?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. I mean, I'm teaching my younger athletes now, the teenagers, to we have some sessions that are watch based and some sessions that we put the watches down and they don't have any watches on at all. It can't go on Strava, and that's the end of it. Yeah, because they're running free then, so they're actually having to feel the pace. So they're feeling the pace judgment rather than having to look at their watch every 2 seconds to decide if they're running the right pace. And I think feeling that pace is much more important, especially when you come to racing, that you're not looking at your watch every 2 seconds. So yeah, sometimes we have them on a 2-mile loop doing fartlek, and they're in a similar ability group, and each person chooses one section that they can randomly choose. One does 3 lampposts that absolutely eyeballs out, and the next person then decides that they're going to do 5 lampposts of very slow jogging or even a walk, and the next one's going to do some threshold bit. So they all choose on a 2-mile loop what they're going to do. Then they come back, have a drink and a rest, and then they do it again. So that's quite fun. But I would say taking the watches off for everybody is a really useful tool, because you've got to start feeling the pace. I mean, my mum was a marathon runner, and a quick one, and she would look at her little watch before she left the house, or the clock on the cooker, and she would go and run. And then when she got back in, she'd do a stretch, and she'd look at the clock on the cooker again, and then think, well, I've been out about an hour and a half, and I roughly think that pacing was about 8-minute miling, so I know how far I've been. And that would be it.
It is interesting here. A message from Sarah coming up here says she sometimes has the best races when she's watch free. I've had my best races ever when I was watch free. Don't wear a watch, because ultimately it's not going to help me. If I've got to overtake the person in front, I've got to learn the skill to do that. So I'm with Sarah on this one.
I think just to add to that as well, I think it's such a great advertisement for cross-country running as well, in terms of, cross-country running really teaches you how to race and scrap and go through the pain barrier a little bit. The split times mean very little. It's just how muddy you are at the end, and have you been able to get that extra position towards the front.
On that note, we're going to move on. We're going to go to give you now something to go away and do, a task. Is that all right, folks? Rich is going to put it up for us now. Here we go. Using one of the 4 example sessions outlined, we want you to discuss how you would adapt it for either a beginner runner halfway through a beginner's for 5K course, a runner aiming to improve their 10K time, or a runner halfway through training for a marathon. We're going to put you into groups. We're going to give you about 6 minutes to be able to come up with some brief ideas. We'd like you, please, in each group to nominate a spokesperson. I will then randomly ask one of the groups at the end to give us their feedback. We'll use our trusted buzzer again, so we can put you down to about 60 seconds feedback each. Rich.
Perfect. I'm going to go and put you into breakout rooms a second. I'm just going to ask Chris Mallander just to put the task into the chat box, so you've got that to hand. I'm going to put you into 15 breakout rooms, so you'll probably be having in the region of sort of 8-9 of you in each group. Just give me one moment. Okay, so in a moment, I'm just going to move you all across. You're going to be in the room for about 10 minutes. All right. You're going to get an option to join them in just a moment. And yeah, just make sure there's one person who takes notes, who can feedback into the chat box afterwards. All right. So get ready. You will start getting the opportunity to join your breakout room.
Thank you all very much. Welcome back. Now then, here we go. What we're going to do now is pick on just about 5 people, please, to give us some feedback. Remember, everything we showed you tonight are examples, ways of doing it, whether it's the warm-up or the main session. It's not the definitive way, because you're coming up with some brilliant ways of doing things. So let's ask, first of all, then, who have we got there I can pick up on? Anybody at all who looked at it from the beginner's course perspective, if you want to give it a wave, please. And perhaps Rich or Chris can see the wave, and we'll ask them, please, as spokesperson, to give us their feedback.
Right, I'm just bringing up the participants list. I have seen that Doug has got his hand up. So Doug, do you want to unmute and yeah, tell us what you spoke about?
Sure. Hi. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, we basically looked at for the beginners. We looked at meet and retreat. It's quite a you know a good thing for a beginner, because it introduces them to the running group. It's quite a sociable thing as well, and I think it would break them in quite easily. And another thing with meet and retreat is that they can run at their own pace. It doesn't put pressure on them, and there's a little bit of teamwork goes on with the other person that they're running with. And that's what we felt with that particular you know, for meet and retreat. I mean, it works excellent also for 10K runners and for marathon runners as well.
Okay, right, thank you. So the key bit about that is that something like beginner meet and retreat, by the way, is one of my favorite sessions. I love doing meet and retreat, but because it's all about really about your environment, if you start to contain the working area, then suddenly you can make it applicable to every single one of your runners. It's a great session, isn't it, Doug?
Yeah, it is good for everybody, definitely.
Okay, let's go on. Anybody looked at the 10K? Which session? Anybody did 10K? Please wave your hand.
Oh, I'm just going to get us to bring in Sarah. Just before we do, I'm just going to say just one thing, is that if there was a nominated person in your group, please just feed that back in the chat box, and we will, like we did last week, just send out a few additional ideas. Sarah, over to you.
Oh, hi. Yeah, we kind of said that really we kind of could incorporate a lot of all three ideas really. So we said, even if you're doing like a 10K distance, you could use short distances as practice sprints. So for example, like myself, I'm not a sprinter, but I've found that by doing like 300 meters or anything like that would help me with a longer distance, anything that's sort of running quicker than your normal pace, a bit like you said. And we also said as well for that, probably the hills as well, again, for beginners, for everybody, because you'd have like the faster runners would get to the top of the hill. And when they get to the top, everybody could then turn back and go back down the hill again. And that would build your strength as well as your speed. So you've got a real combination going there of everything. So yeah, we kind of said you could just incorporate the lot really.
Sarah, thank you for that. I think going uphill is great because it does create strength. Love your idea as well of that. When the first one gets stopped, everybody could stop, because the point there is that everybody's working to their own ability. And so in essence, they all feel part of that collective by doing it. I just think, Sarah, that's a really good idea. So thank you for sharing that one.
All right.
The idea about speed's really important. Sarah, why is it then you think that developing a change of pace is important for your runners?
I think, well, it gets you, I think probably you touched upon it earlier, I think it gets your body ready and to adjust to different speeds, so that when you are in that race, and I found this myself, when you think, my God, I'm out of my comfort zone now, this is just too much, you're used to doing that, so you can actually carry on, and all of a sudden your body think, I can do it, and it's strange how you can. I
think you're right. Thank you for that. So the takeaway message from that is that in the training, you want that to replicate what's going to happen in the racing. So you prepare the body in advance. It might take weeks, months, or years. But when I said about the outcome of doing the hills up and down, I said what I want to do is be able to kick off the hill, because of the first few attempts, they'll go up the hill, feel fine, but won't have the strength to kick off. Over weeks, months, and years, they develop the strength to kick off the hill.
Yeah.
Just what you've said there is preparing them. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Anybody done the marathon, half marathon? It is a marathon, yes. Anybody done the marathon?
I'm just having a quick look. Oh, I think we've got Natalie's raised. We've got Natalie and Mark have raised their hands. So let's go to Natalie first, and then we'll bring Mark in afterwards, okay?
We actually managed to have time to cover most levels, so beginner, 10K and marathon. And we chatted about doing an out and back and how that actually really works well for all the runners and all the groups. Nick in our group mentioned that they do a crossroads, which our group also do. We call it a starburst. So maybe going out in one direction for 4 or 5 minutes and back, and then another direction until you might do it 4 or 5 times, depending where you are. But it's quite a good way of building up a distance for a marathon runner, but also then you can use it for somebody doing a 10K at the same time, because they might just do 2 of the strands or 3 of the strands if you've got somebody else to be there for the cool down, depending on your group. And so we felt like the out and back worked for our levels really well.
Natalie, you raised another interesting point there. You know, the idea you said about going different directions. One of the things that, you know, I find sometimes as a distance runner, and I bet other people do as well, is that sometimes when you have to change direction, it gets a bit disheartening, because you think, oh no, I've got to go out, but I've got to come back, and I know it's 10, 13, 14 miles to go. So what you're saying there is you're preparing the body to turn and to come back on itself and trying to stay relaxed. I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah, we found it worked really well with our runners in the longer runs, knowing that central point might be home or somebody's car with water in, or supplies, or snacks. I'd just be sat with the snacks, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. All right, let's bring Mark in, and then we'll move on from here. So, Mark, do you want to raise a point from your group, Mark? Well, Mark, just come off mute for us a second.
Sorry, is that me?
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we looked at an out and back session as well. And we kind of looked at the session from more of an endurance perspective. So continuous format with either short recoveries or maybe even no recovery. And one of the things that we thought we could do is find out your desired sort of marathon time and try and estimate your target pace. So maybe steal or just cover up the watch. So see if your partners can meet back at the beginning at the same time. And obviously the idea of covering up the watch rather than stealing it is so that you're not quite so mean, so you can still upload your session to Strava and log the miles. Very important for marathon training. But yeah, we thought obviously marathon runners still need to incorporate some speed work. So we thought that you could kind of split the session into 2. And you could do a speed out and back. So the first, in a pyramid format, so the first pyramid would be like, say, 15 seconds out, 15 back, then build up to 30, 45, 60, and back down again. And then you recover. So that first element is continuous, but you're doing slightly faster sort of repetitions. But then we thought the endurance out and back, which could be the next section of the session, could be a longer set, but the same sort of format. So maybe, you know, you're kind of your 5 minutes out and back, for example, 10 minutes, something like that. But yeah, obviously the idea of all of that is to try and incorporate your kind of your pacing strategy as well. So your pace management as well.
Okay, right, Mark, I was going to stop you there if I may, but I want to ask you one question before we go. Is you talk about a pace strategy there, which presumably you're meaning pace judgment. Why is that important for developing with your runners?
So obviously if you're training for a marathon, most people will, unless they're training necessarily maybe for their first marathon, most people will have a time in mind. And it's obviously quite important to be able to judge that kind of based on feel, because if you're running a marathon based on your watch, it kind of, you know, it has quite an effect if for example the terrain is variable, so you need to know that you're running by feel. Your conditions can make a big difference, and where obviously you're running for a long time in a marathon, you need to know that you can vary your pace. Okay, thank you very much. The key bit there I like then is the fact that actually that you're talking about developing pace judgment. Now it's the same for your beginners, whether or even something like if it's walking or running or 10K or anything at all. Pace judgment, get the runners to know what it feels like at a certain pace,
It can take a long time to do that, but of course you're training that ability to do it through a variety of training sessions. And you're highlighting there, as everybody else is highlighting, that if I put different training paces in different sessions, then of course the body can only do one thing, it can start to improve. Thank you all for your feedback on that. Some great points mentioned and some really good points to share. Rich.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. I love the last point. It always makes me think of that sort of running IQ, the skills that we have to give us the best chance of fulfilling our potential. So yeah, some really good bits there. At this point, I'm going to pass over to Enator, who are going to give us a bit of an update over the products they provide. And there's an opportunity for all of you again. And then after they've done their brief update, we're going to come back in at the end with a couple of top tips, and there'll be an opportunity to ask us some questions. So I'm going to pass over to Enator now and bring up their slides, and over we go.
Great, thanks for passing that on. Yeah, so just to give a little intro to the Enator business for people that haven't sort of heard of us before, we're a sort of 20-year-old company. We started sort of working kind of elite athletes in the whole area of how do you keep them sort of injury-free, and sort of performing better. We started with people like sort of Paula Radcliffe, Michael, the footballer, and over the years we've worked with lots of sort of Olympic champions, Premier League footballers. We did a lot of work with the sort of folks like Bradley Wiggins and Chris Froome, and they were winning the sort of the Tour de France and things like that. And we did a sort of a clinical trial that I think was the largest in the world, that was run by the British Army and Melbourne University. And with our technology, they saw a 66% reduction in the risk of an injury. And so, you know, we're all about trying to create technologies to help people stay injury-free. There's no sort of cure-all. It's about reduction in risk. So I don't know if can I control the slides, or
I'll move you on to your next one, Nick. All right.
That'd be great. Thank you.
One moment. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay on my laptop, so we might go forward a
couple. No worries.
Oh, there we go.
No worries. Yeah, so we've really got sort of three main areas. We spend a lot of time on the whole area of claims. We've done lots of different independent studies. We have our own sort of clinic, about 120,000 sort of people through a specific data points that we've then used to build our sort of latest technology. We also try to work with lots of various sort of bodies, and also our friend there, Usain Bolt, he actually used the tech in his training for the Rio Olympics, and then became an ambassador on the back of it. Yeah, so if you can flip maybe to the next slide. This is the new tech, so we're really excited about this. This is the most sort of the highest amount of shock absorption per mil that we think of any material out there. I mean, the chemistry in the insole basically does two main things. One, it can help support and keep the foot kind of aligned. So if you sort of heavily overpronate or supinate, or you have some particular issues with your biodynamics or your gait, a good orthotic insole, you know, can help to sort of stabilize that and therefore reduce the risk of injuries. The second thing is that it's about blocking the shock. So, you know, we're all familiar with sort of wearing crash helmets in cycling, or gum guards or shin pads. You know, we all think about those sort of impacts, but what we don't tend to think of is that 98% of the impacts on your body when you're running or doing any sort of sport comes through your feet. And it can be, you know, sprinting, where it's very high impact. It can be repetitive over a long period of time. Even walking, you know, commuting in sort of poor footwear, you know, can, in hard sort of leisure shoes and things, you know, can cause issues. So what our tech does, you can see by the graphic there, in a normal sort of thing, the shock waves tend to travel up, but a bit like a crash helmet, it has a sort of an attenuation, which basically spreads out the load across the sole of the foot. And the chemistry is also really hard to do, because in a crash helmet or gum guard, it's just about blocking the shock, but that won't work for feet, because you also need to have some efficiency, some energy return. Otherwise it'd be like running on sand or pillows. So we've developed this thing so it also has an energy return. So the analogy is a bit like a trampoline. It kind of blocks the shock and then also returns. And to do that, keeping it incredibly thin, light, is really hard to do. So we're thrilled with this, and we just launched this about 6 months ago, and you know, the reviews and the product has gone down exceptionally well. If you could go on one more, please.
Nick, just before we do move on, there's just been a question which has come in, and it's just been asking, what's the difference between sort of Enator and perhaps other brands like Sorbethane? Is there any particular differences that you're able to kind of showcase why Enator is so effective?
Yeah. I mean, Sorbethane is a great product, and it's also in the whole area of shock absorption. The new PX1, that is our own sort of brand new material, it's about double the shock absorption per mil versus something like a traditional gel, versus the Sorbethane, it's about 48% better. So Sorbethane is still a very good shock absorber, and it is therefore you can have them thinner and slightly lighter. So those are the main differences. It's just in the chemicals, and also the sort of the understanding of the design. That if you flip onto the next slide, actually, I can show you a little bit.
Just going to move over one moment. There we go.
So some of the other things that are sort of subtle but are built into the design, and these are important sort of aspects. So there's a Met pad, a Met dome, which you can't really see too well in the graphic, but it's a small sort of mini raise just in front of the forefoot, and that goes just under the front of your Met heads, where your big toes effectively connect to your forefoot. And what that does is it helps to actually spread the load out on your forefoot. There's a drop point there on the first Met, which is effectively your big toe, in help to sort of keep the sort of natural movement. And a small sort of soft arch support, again, just to sort of control a little bit the pronation. You're obviously not eliminating it, but you're just controlling it. So there's some design features that are, again, as we say, we've done this for a long time to sort of figure out exactly what is the best sort of design. Now, this will work for sort of 90% of people. There are 10% of people who say would have very, very sort of like one leg much different than the other, serious high arch, or some specific issues that maybe you would need a more sort of bespoke product. But this in general should work for sort of 90% of people. Maybe you can go on one more, please.
Yeah, just again, before I do, if that's all right, Nick, we've had a few questions come in. The first one's about, could Enator replace custom orthotics?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's it does work for sort of 90% of people, but if you have very specific issues, then sometimes using a custom made one will make that difference. I mean, we do custom as well, so that's really where we started, and we still have a big business in that, and we can offer sort of custom done at home through a sort of a phone box and an online consultation, even if you can't make it to the clinic, particularly in sort of lockdown and those kind of things. So it wouldn't replace it, but obviously sometimes people go for a custom when they don't actually probably need it or need that extra expense. A really good off the shelf, we believe as I say, can work for sort of 90% of people.
Okay, so a couple of quick questions. What's the largest men's shoe size it goes up to?
30. Well, for the size 14, it goes up to.
Okay. One of the questions has just been asked. Can I ask if insoles eliminate a runner from aiming to improve their running form strength, and should they be used just for training or for races or a mixture? Are there any particular thoughts on when they should and shouldn't be used?
I mean, if you're using a sort of an insole or an orthotic that's designed for specific corrections, now sometimes you use them for a period of time to say adjust your gait or your foot, and then let your muscles effectively get used to that new position, and then you would actually take it out. But that tends to be done with a bespoke, with a sort of a podiatrist. These ones aren't really corrective in that sense. They're more about just sort of blocking the shock absorption. So wearing them in your sort of everyday trainers and things. I mean, if you're competing, like so Bolt, for instance, he wouldn't wear these in his sprint spikes. He wore them when he was training, but they're not appropriate in a sort of in a sprint spike, for instance.
Perfect. And just two very quick last ones. One is just roughly how long would a pair of insoles last for?
So they normally last up to about 1,000 sort of road miles. So typically about 2 pairs of trainers. And
the other question was just somebody was asking about flat feet. Would these insoles help or hinder? Is it sort of fair to say that they potentially could be, and it would be sort of advisable to work alongside a podiatrist to make sure it's the right level of support for them?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not sure, it's obviously better if you can get some professional advice. But yes, they are specifically designed for people with flat feet, to give a little bit of sort of cushion arch support. So just to sort of help a little bit of that sort of overpronation, but obviously not eliminating it, because you don't want that. It's designed to work with the sort of natural movement of your foot as well.
Perfect. Okay, I'll move you on to your next slide.
Thank you.
He says, famous last word. There we go.
Yeah, so this just shows some of the sort of reviews. I mean, the best way to sort of to see all those is to actually just go onto our website, and we tend to get sort of new reviews each day. But we've had some great coverage in lots of the sort of the running magazines, from Women's Running to Runner's World and the Times, the Telegraph. Lots of people have tried them and really found that they've helped. So we're hoping that if you do have pains or injuries and you want something to help to try to alleviate, then hopefully you'll find something good with them. Okay, if you wouldn't mind keeping going.
Yeah.
I'd just like to announce sort of one other thing that we're doing is we got a government grant to help with to create the sort of world's first sort of recycling program specifically for insoles. So we'd love you to get the message out. There's no sort of actual incentive. It's more about just trying to sort of do the right thing, if you like. So it's we will accept any insoles. So our insoles or capacitor insoles, you can just put them back into the box or any other sort of packaging that you've got. Hopefully it's already been used packaging, so we're not adding to the environment. We have a free stamped addressed label that you can put on, and then it comes back. And the idea is that we're then recycling it. We're working with a number of sort of different partners to sort of put it into children's playgrounds. It can also be used for things like insulation in houses, which again then has a sort of a wider green benefit. So we'd love it if you would one, participate in this, and two, sort of spread the word, because we're trying to create a sort of a template, a blueprint, if you like, to sort of expand this, probably obviously beyond insoles if we can, but at the moment it's a sort of pilot program on specifically on insoles. And then if you could go to the last slide.
Okay.
And so the last slide here, so a little sort of nice, hopefully prize draw for anybody that's interested. We're giving away 15 £30 gift cards to use on the store. You can buy whatever you want. The insoles, we have sort of technical running socks and base layers and a few other sort of goodies on there, if you like. So that's the link there. It's a bit of a mouthful to remember, but hopefully we can put the link also in the chat, and then you just click on that. If you do it by midnight tonight, you just put your email address in, we'll enter you into the draw, and we will draw 15 probably tomorrow morning, and then we'll let the winners know. And that's it. So thank you very much. If anybody's got any more questions, fire them away. If not, appreciate your time.
Brilliant. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Chris Mallander just to put the link into the chat box so people can enter that. And there's a couple of questions which have come in on the chat box. I'll just give you the option to directly respond to those, if that's all right, just so we can move the presentation on, if that's all right.
Okay, super. Well, thank you
very much. Thank you. Okay, so at that point, I'm going to pass you back over to Chris Hollinshead and Kerry for perhaps a couple of top tips to share, if that's all right.
Okay, thank you very much. That puts me on the spot. Kerry, any top tips?
Nicely moved over to me, Chris. Put me on the spot instead. I love it. So my top tip, I would say that would be actually around stretching and cool down. And just a quick one would probably be that if you don't do your stretching at the end of a session, none of your people in your group would do the stretching at the end of the session. So I think gathering them round and maybe stopping your session about 20, 50 meters, 60 meters, 100 meters before the actual stop place is, because everyone sprints to the finish, don't they, at the end of a run. So getting them to all regroup before you get back to your place, and then everybody have a mix in and have a chat with other people. and you then call them all over and you tell them you're going to be doing your stretches now. So they all have to do their stretching together. Get that silent tumbleweed moment going, so they're all watching you and not talking, and you're not talking while you're doing the stretches, so that they're all doing it and watching it with you. So my top tip is to stop the session before you get back, gather everyone in, and they can walk back in as part of their cool down, and then they can all watch you and do their static stretching together with you, and they can have a chat then as well, can't they?
Thanks, Kerry. So my top tip is this. Think right back to an hour and a half ago now. I think about some of the activities we show you for the warm-up. These are just ideas you could do, but make your warm-up applicable to the runner's needs. That's my top tip of the night. Don't complicate things. Keep it as simple and straightforward, but get the movement patterns ready for when the runner gets working. And remember, there's time from them getting to the venue to when they go for the formalized bit to actually, as Emma did, get out the car and start to move and mobilize and to get the body going. And my second top tip of the night is, when you're thinking about your main session, think about what the focus of the session is and try to link the focus from that and your warm up together. Rich.
Perfect. I'm gonna check one final one in there. And I remember a coach saying this to me, and it always stood out to me, is that if you had two athletes who did the exact same training and had the exact same genetics and everything was the same about them, but you had one athlete who worked on their running form and one who didn't, you'd always back the athlete who's worked on the running form based on the fact that they're going to waste less energy when they're running. They're going to be more efficient when they go along. And I must stress, I've seen some weird and wonderful running shapes. I'm sure all of you have and so forth, but I think it is a really good thing to incorporate into your sessions, and focusing on keeping your head up and opposite arms and the high hips and all the other bits that the team have gone through tonight. So yeah, try and encourage your runners to do those things, challenge yourself to do them, and if you're interested in more stuff like this, there will be more courses. I just want to.
Can I just bring in one point there, please? Right, going back to running technique. The reality is this, is that if you're taking people out for 5 or 6, 7 mile runs, for example, as a leader, you probably won't get to see all the runners to give them feedback. However, when they are warming up in a confined space, you get the opportunity to send subliminal messages to them week in, week out about running form. Hence why when we put that warm up together for you tonight, we integrated staying tall, high hips, arms driving back, and that becomes the norm, and you got an opportunity to view everybody and start giving them feedback.
Perfect. Well, look, a couple of things I wanted to say to begin with before we bring us tonight to a close is we want to say thank you to everyone who's booked onto this. It's been great to do 5 sessions with you. It doesn't seem possible that we've flown through 5 weeks like this, and I can't believe how much Chris Holland's hair's grown during this time, to be quite frank with you. But
down there now.
On a serious note, we've tried to make the sessions very applicable to you, to give you things that you can incorporate in your sessions. So like last week, looking at the core skills of a leader. This week, obviously, we've touched on types of sessions, running form. We've looked at goal setting, adapting your offer, etc. We've got a couple of real aims. One of them is we want to deliver some practical sessions. So we're looking at hopefully June, July time, to be able to go out on the road and start doing some practical type delivery. Obviously, we're working in an ever-changing landscape at the moment, but all we can do is try. And we want to continue doing regular sort of webinars and stuff like that. We're going to send out a survey to you in the next week or so. We'd love any input that you've got on ideas on what worked well, what you didn't enjoy, topics that you'd be interested in, whatever it might be, so we can try and shape an offer. But we just really want to say thank you for your engagement. Thank you for enthusiasm. It's amazing to hear that there's so many people out there passionate leads running, and let's hope over the next few weeks we can get you back out there and doing what you will do best.
Rich, can I bring in one final thought?
Yeah, go for it.
Right, okay. As we've discussed many times in the last 12 months, we're in uncertain times. However, we can see that with the government suggesting that lockdown restrictions may all being well start to ease, here's my one thought for run leaders. Please reflect back to the session 2 weeks ago about goals and short-term aims, and try to get your runners just to be realistic about what they want to try and achieve. because no one knows what the next 6 months will hold. But actually, they suddenly may become very tempted to go into that sweet shop and get every single sweet off the shelf, when actually what we need to do is take 2 steps back as leaders and think, let's be realistic here. Let's set some achievable, realistic goals and use some stepping stones to be able to get us to somewhere. Other words, play it safe. Try to keep your training structured.
Yeah, and I think just before everyone came on tonight, me and Chris were just talking about, you can see it now, perhaps races coming back in the autumn and everybody going a little bit mad, and before long lots of people breaking down, so we sort of our bodies breaking down, so we've clearly got a role to try and keep people in one piece. But look, what we're going to do now is me, Chris and Kerry are going to stay on for a few minutes. If people have got any questions, please feel free to pop your hand up, and we'll come to you and try and answer it. But again, just want to say thank you, and we'll send out some information later this week with tonight's recording and accompanying information. But yeah, look after yourselves, keep doing what you're doing, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you all soon. All right, thank you everyone. Right, if you've got a question, pop your hand up and see what you've got to say, and we'll try and answer it. Alternatively, pop it in the chat box and we'll go from there.
Joanne, I believe you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I picked up just on when you said about running up steep hills, and you said after 9% gradient, it sort of gets a bit watered down. Have you got anything different that you would do if it was a really steep hill? The only reason I ask is that obviously in tag chapter we can't avoid them anyway, but there are quite a few. I must admit, I like hills. I like to run up them, and one of the races I do out at Guy Fawkes 10 out at Ripley has a 15% gradient hill in it. And I just wondered if there's anything different. I did actually, to be fair, as a run leader, I did a bit of like advice to somebody who kept, I was just plodding up the hill because it was so steep. And this girl kept stopping and walking and then catching up to me. Stopping and walking, she was at another club. And I said to her in the end, I said, the best thing to do is, rather than try and attack it so fast that you're going to run out of steam, is to take it a lot more steadier. And I said, and try and use your arms a bit more and push up onto your toes a little bit more, and sort of drive up the hill a bit rather than. But I said, but don't try and run it like the pace you want to run. Your fastest mile kind of thing.
Okay,
is
right.
There
Thank you.
Was different.
Right, Joanne, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask our team here that question. My answer, first of all, is this. You raised a really nice point there as a run leader, and that is break a hill down into stages, because generically it doesn't go like that straight. So you're right, break it down into stages. What are you going to say, Rich? And first of all, Kerry.
Well, I would probably have it as you wouldn't have to go all the way up the hill, and you just practice maybe doing some Kenyan hills. So you pick a spot which is about 70 meters up from the bottom, and you look up the hill where you want to stop at 70 meters up. You go up one side, and then you come back down to the bottom. And when you get to the bottom, you go back up and then come back down. And you want to stay nice and tall, looking up the hill the other way. And you want to do the same pace up, sort of same pace down. So you're keeping it nice the same, sort of like about a 7 out of 10 effort level, 7.5 out of 10. So sort of going into threshold. So you're a little bit breathy, but you're not absolutely, you can't not chat or anything. You can still give a few words, as long as the second word isn't off or something like that to somebody. But generally, it's, you're doing that same pace up, same pace down, and that's Kenyan hills. And you want to do, maybe start with sort of like 3 lots of 4 minutes or something like that with a 2-minute stop. When the time's up, you all walk down to the bottom, have a little rest for a couple of minutes where your drink bottles are, and then do the next set. So up and down in a loop, just trying to stay tall, looking up the hill. And when you're coming down the hill, don't lean backwards, try and stay upright as well as you're coming back down. So your foot's landing underneath that centre of mass still. And then you can build up to maybe 3 lots of sort of 10 minutes or even, 11, 12 minutes if you wanted to, but build it up, But that's a nice way, all right?
Oh, thank you. That's good.
My top tip.
The only thing I would probably add to that when I'm just thinking about hills is just probably more generally around running. It's the aim of the game is to manage your effort so you can maximize your performance. And I think it's that piece, I've seen a lot of people really attack hills, and then when they get to the top, they're absolutely shattered. And one of the bits that we often forget about is the transition off the top. I mean, if you can get up a hill at a reasonable pace and you can keep your legs turning over, potentially you can actually then work quite well off the top. Very much alluding to what Kerry sort of said there about, you know, breaking hills down. If it's local, recce them. And the final thing I would say is it will ultimately depend on the race discipline. I've got one of those crazy friends who likes to do those insane ultra races. He likes doing like 200-mile races and stuff like that. And he will tell you kind of, you know, some of those hills, it's a great chance to get a bag of cheddars on or something like that, so he can fuel up. He's got no interest in running them. But I suppose it comes back to that first point, isn't it? It's around managing your effort for your overlap.
Yeah, I've got to say, to be fair on that one, I do struggle with that one. I mean, I've done a couple of hard north half marathons, and I'm friends with the race directors, and they've actually, Shirley Steele said to me, she said, "You really haven't got it, have you, Joe?" I said, "No, I ran all the way round." And it's like, it's a race, isn't it? It's to run, isn't it? And so I'll be honest and say, I don't think I'm quite cut out for the ultra bit somehow, because to me, taking walking poles on a race does not quite, you know, maybe that's just my personal point, but anyways, I'd like to thank you for the sessions. They've been really good. And I'm definitely going to feel the pace. That's definitely taking that away from that, and covering up the watch on doing that. I'm certainly going to take that away.
Thank you very much.
I always, Chris, after you said about when you get on the start line of a race, you said you run how you feel. Well, I took that approach after I heard you say that when you came to visit our club many moons ago. So, you know, if you ever get back up to Tadcaster when you're allowed, it'd be lovely to see you.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Oh, let's bring, I can see Mary Matthews. Mary, do you want to ask your question? Just come off mute for us. Hiya.
Hi there. We're both running leaders, and one of the issues we have is when you're doing sessions and doing reps, and the other one that sort of comes in particularly is pyramids, is the rest period between the rep. Is there a sort of formula or advice on the amount of rest time between the actual rep, depending on obviously the actual distance?
So there's obviously, depending on what the objective of the session is, depends on the amount of rest we give. And I'll bring kind of Kerry and Chris in on this a little bit. I suppose one thing which is always worth thinking about is what's the main aim. If the main aim is around really focusing on speed, generally speaking, we want longer periods of rest. Whereas if it's more around conditioning and aerobic fitness and so forth, we can often work off a shorter period of rest. But in terms of formulas, you'll find lots of ones out there, but I'll let Kerry and Chris chuck in their thoughts on how they would attack that one, if that's okay.
Okay, I'll go first this one then, Kerry. Right, what I would look at is this, first of all, is think about, as Richard said, think about a couple of things. One is the time of the year, okay? Because if it's in the middle of the winter, you're not going to want a big amount of time to recover. So my recovery might be less, but of course with that my speed will be slower, obviously, because there's less time to recover. If on the other hand, for example, you want to try and develop a change of pace, why not give them a talk test recovery? So what I did when I went up to see people like up at Tadcaster areas, what we did there was I didn't let them do the next rep until they could tell me what they're having for the tea without being breathless. And as soon as they could tell me, they could go. What happened is they all started off their next repetition at different times. Now, you're going to tell me sometimes that's an issue. I'm going to say, no, it's not as a run leader, because they're all working within a confined area. Paul Evans' session, Kerry's session, my session tonight were about confined areas. And once I'm doing that, then there's a leader, I'm empowering them to tell me when they're ready. So they could have bigger recovery, talk test recovery, tell them what they're having for the tea. If they can't, they're going, you're not going anywhere. And sometimes they want to go doing that because the friends are going, but it's not to their advantage. Keep them back, let them recover. More is better.
Kerry, have you got anything to add on that?
Not really. I like Chris's answers, actually. They were very useful. I love the fact that they have to decide themselves when they think they're ready to go. Generally, we obviously see sprinters sat around the tracks and they just seem to be sat around doing nothing for a long period of time. But that's obviously because they're using that one energy system, which obviously takes a long time to recover. That fight or flight, that fast, really eyeballs out for sort of 5 or 6 second stuff, you know. So they might need sort of 8 to 10 minutes recovery. But when you're doing your longer stuff and the longer, less intense intervals, then obviously you need less time. So the longer they're out running for, the less time they need to recover generally. Yeah.
Okay, that's really useful. Actually, the idea of getting them to, shall I say, self-time through Chris's idea,
isn't it?
I think we'll do that for a bit of variety, at least at
Bit
some
of fun.
point.
They've got to tell you some things about what they're having for tea, and if they can answer all that, then it's time for them to go.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's bring in Louise. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Evening.
Hey, yeah.
Evening.
I probably wanted a little bit of clarification around the return to running pathway.
Okay, yeah.
From
I will do
COVID.
my best. All right. I failed miserably in a team meeting this morning, so my line manager's on the line now. He'll be able to tell me whether I've been a good boy and listened. But go on, let's see how we can help.
So I think we understand that as organised social runs, we can return from the 29th of March. But as far as coaching and coaching of groups, is that the same in a COVID secure environment? We can return from the 29th of March?
I'm so glad you brought this up, Louise, because this was the question I got completely stuck on earlier. So this is one I might be able to actually answer. So as of the 29th of March, in principle, 6 of us could meet together and go for a social run. What we're saying as well is clubs will be able to start delivering structured training sessions, providing it's COVID secure. So you'd have to have COVID officer in place, and you'd need to kind of done a risk assessment and all the bits which are alluded to on the website. The ratios won't change. So ultimately, if you're a qualified leader, you can work up to 12 people. The bit we're just waiting for clarity on is whether there is a limit to the number of people who are allowed to be in a session or together at one time. So we're not going to come around and say a leader can only work with 6 people or a leader can go and work with 36 people. They will always be able to work with a group of 12, but what we're just checking on is just whether the government are going to say they're capping the number of people together. I think the example given earlier was if you take a different sport, if you took something like football, for example, where you normally have 11-a-side football plus a referee and so forth. We believe that as of that date, you'd be able to get 23 people back together playing football. So we just need to understand what that would be. But yeah, in short, by the end of March, we're expecting that to be the case, and I think there'll be further clarity on that later this week.